The Wednesday Strangler. It was a strange name given to a figure involved in a series of bizarre incidents that took place in the 1970s and 80s that still hasn't officially been solved to this day. A series of crimes that, for some reason, almost always seemed to take place on a Wednesday and always ended in someone's untimely passing. Over a period of 14 years, 7 women from Saga Prefecture fell victim to this so-called strangler. But who was it really? Why were these women targeted? And why were the incidents always carried out on a Wednesday? Let's dive in and take a look. To start, we're going all the way back to 1975. The first person to go missing was Yamazaki Tomiko, a junior high first grader who lived in Kitagata City, now Takeo City. On August 27th, 1975, Wednesday, her mother left for work at 4 p.m. Reports on what exactly her mother did at the time were conflicting, but she worked in the food industry. Several years later, she ran a snack bar, so it's highly likely, especially taking her working hours into account, that she also worked in a snack bar at the time of the incident. Either way, Yamazaki's mother left for work in nearby Shiroishi City at 4 p.m., leaving her daughter home alone. Yamazaki occasionally joined her mother at work and studied in the waiting room, but on this particular day, she stayed home. Yamazaki's friend came over to her house for a few hours before leaving around 7 p.m. Yet, when her mother arrived home from work around midnight, Yamazaki was nowhere to be seen. The lights and TV had been left on, and her futon pulled out to sleep. Her shoes were untouched, and there was no sign of a struggle. It was as though she had vanished into thin air. Her mother searched the neighborhood for her, but when she couldn't find her, she filed a missing persons report with the Omachi police on August 28th, the following day. The police were unable to find any leads, however, and the case quickly went cold. Sometime over the next few years, Yamazaki's mother moved away from Kitagata City to Saga City, roughly 30 kilometers away. The disappearance of her daughter remained a sad, terrifying mystery. The next woman to go missing wasn't until 5 years later, and naturally the incidents weren't initially thought to be connected. Half a decade had passed, after all. Hyakutake Ritsuko, who was 19 at the time, worked part-time in a cafe in Omachi. She lived with her parents, older sister, younger brother, and younger sister. Those around her considered Hyakutake to be a serious young woman. After junior high, she left Omachi to go to nursing school in Hyogo Prefecture, and after graduating, returned to Saga and went to another nursing school close to home. In 1978, she started working part-time at the Cafe Linden. The owner's daughter was a classmate of her older sister. Her time at the cafe and various nursing schools had made her many friends, both male and female, but around the time of her disappearance, it was believed that she was having troubles with the opposite sex. In particular, she had been seen making calls to a male acquaintance from the cafe. Hyakutake was a hard worker who never missed work, but before her disappearance, she had attempted to end matters twice over her boy troubles. Rumors soon spread that she proclaimed she wished to end things on her upcoming 20th birthday, and she had scrawled in a notebook at work, "All I can think about is him." Him was apparently Hyakutaku's older sister's boyfriend. Supposedly, he was seeing both of them, and 2 weeks before she disappeared, Hyakutake left behind evidence that she was about to go on a trip. When her friends spoke to her about what to give a friend for her upcoming wedding, she reportedly answered, "I have no time for such matters. I have more serious things to think about." At 11:30 p.m. on April 12, 1980, Friday, half an hour before her 20th birthday, Hyakutake disappeared from her house wearing her favorite negligee. At the time, her father was hospitalized with an injury, so her mother was by his side. Her sisters were also spending the night elsewhere, and her brother was working in a different prefecture. She was all alone. Just like Yamazaki, Hyakutake's shoes were found in the house, and there was no sign of a struggle. Her parents, aware of the rumours that she wished to end matters on her 20th birthday, quickly set out to find her. However, 3 days after her disappearance, her father received a letter written in old-fashioned script. It consisted of 3 lines. The first line was never released due to information pertaining to the family's privacy. The second and third lines, however, went as follows. Your daughter's not coming back. Suffer. They also received phone calls telling them not to go on TV or release their daughter's photo. Just like Yamazaki, Hyakutake had disappeared without a trace. On June 24th, 2 months after Hyakutake's disappearance, a sanitation worker was cleaning the toilet tanks at Suko Elementary School in Omachi. This cleaning took place once every 2 months, when he opened the lid and discovered a body inside. It was Hyakutake. She was floating face up and covered in stones to weigh her down. Her face was decomposed beyond recognition, but the police were able to grab a fingerprint from her left thumb to verify her identity. The police from Shiroishi and Omachi joined forces to investigate the case, and squads were sent out to comb the areas surrounding the school for evidence. As this was taking place, the vice principal made another request of the police. Reportedly, the school requested cleaning for a separate set of toilets on June 18th because the school pool was about to open for swimming season, but the tank was full of rocks, so they couldn't get in. When the police investigated, they made yet another shocking discovery: the body of Yamazaki. 2 young women had gone missing from the same area in the space of 5 years. Yamazaki in 1975 and Hyakutake in 1980. The women had no apparent connection to each other, and yet their bodies were found in separate toilet tanks on the same school grounds, both covered in rocks. 5 years had passed since Yamazaki had gone missing, so she was little more than bones with some hair. She was still wearing the clothes she had on the day she went missing, and police quickly contacted her mother, now living in Saga. When she saw the clothes, she broke down into tears and nodded over and over, confirming that it was her daughter. The reason no one had discovered her body over the 5 years since her disappearance was because people rarely used those toilets. The path leading to them was rough and full of snakes, so when pool season came around, children used different toilets instead. An autopsy was performed on Hyakutake's body the day after she was discovered. It was determined that she died 1 to 2 months earlier by suffocation. Nothing foreign was discovered in her lungs, meaning the incident likely took place elsewhere and she was dumped in the tank after. Further investigation of the tank revealed her pantyhose and a syringe, as well as a single slipper and a child's sandal. These were considered unrelated to the case. According to the sanitation company, the last cleaning had taken place on April 21st, more than a week after her disappearance. They noticed nothing strange with the tank at the time. On June 10th, 2 weeks before Hyakutake's discovery, the students of Suko Elementary School were cleaning near the toilets when a girl found a clump of red hair. She threw it away, but the police later found and tested it. It was Hyakutake's. Hairs were also discovered on the tank lid, suggesting the body had already been in a state of decay when it was put in. This narrowed the date down to between April 21st and June 10th, with her death taking place sometime during April 12th and April 21st. Considering the similarities in their disappearances and deaths, it seemed likely that the perpetrator of both was the same person, and as it turned out, the police did have a suspect in mind. On March 12, 1981, 29-year-old Yu, name never officially released, was arrested by police on a separate charge of attacking a factory worker. He was, however, also a prime suspect in the deaths of Yamazaki and Hyakutake. And who exactly was Yu? Yu was the man dating Hyakutake's older sister, the man she was thought to be cheating with. Rumors said that Yu wanted to marry her older sister, but her parents were against it, making him resentful. In addition, he was also said to have connections to Yamazaki, being a regular visitor to her mother's bar. Even after her mother moved to Saga City and opened another bar, he reportedly went to visit her there several times. The police arrested several of Yu's friends and tried to extract information from them, but they were unsuccessful. What they did know was that he was a violent man with close connections to both victims, and he also lived in Shiroishi, close to the school both bodies were discovered in. Yu was also a former student of Suko Elementary, so he knew the area well. He had no alibi for the time Hyakutake went missing, and during police questioning revealed that he had been drinking in Shiroishi the night she disappeared until 11 p.m, but after that, he went home. Investigations of his home discovered stationery that matched the threatening letter sent to Hyakutake's parents, and a handwriting analysis confirmed there was a high probability that it was his as well. The police arrested Yu for a second time, but still he denied taking part in her death. In the end, the police had nothing substantial to connect Yu to the threatening letter or Hyakutake's murder. Having the same stationery wasn't in and of itself a crime, and a handwriting analysis wasn't enough to convict in court, so he was released. Things took another turn for the strange when, sometime later, a woman anonymously called the police. "I'm from Omachi, but I got married and live in Takeo City now. I was returning home, to Omachi, for some business one night when I happened to see a man carrying a woman into a car next door. My relationship with my mother-in-law isn't very good, so if I tell you my name, combined with the fact I've briefly returned home, she'll find out and get upset. As such, I can't tell you who I am." Investigations quickly identified the woman as the daughter-in-law of the family who lived behind Hyakutake's house and called her in for questioning. However, the woman claimed to have no memory of ever making such a call. The police refused to believe that it wasn't her and ended up doing voice print matching to confirm the truth. When the first test didn't come back with the results they wanted, they performed a further 2 tests before finally believing her. So then, if it wasn't her, who called them? It was clearly someone who was close to the woman, as they knew the details of her present circumstances. Why would they remain anonymous? Why would they pretend to be someone else? The police were at a loss, and ultimately never found out who it was, or why. Another bizarre twist was added to the case. A year and a half later, a third victim appeared. On October 7th, 1981, Wednesday, 27-year-old Ikegami Chizuko went missing. A married woman from Shiroishi, who worked for the sewing company Limusu, she went grocery shopping around 5 p.m. after work. She was last seen in the supermarket car park talking to a man in his 30s, in a reddish-brown car. One of her colleagues saw her and remarked that they seemed to be friendly. It should be noted that Ikegami had been missing from work for the previous 4 days without word. When she returned, she informed her workplace that she had been caring for her ill mother. However, suspicions were raised when she then went missing, and both her family and workplace filed missing persons reports with the police. Ikegami's body was discovered 2 weeks later, on October 21st, in Nakabaru, now Miyaki, roughly 40 kilometers away. She was found in a fenced-off abandoned lot, and judging by the state of decomposition, had been dead for 1 to 2 weeks. She was identified by the Limusu uniform she was still wearing, and her cause of death was determined to be strangulation. An electrical cord had been wrapped around her neck 4 times, leaving massive bruising. Police had no suspects and the case quickly went cold. A 4th victim appeared 6 months later, this time an 11-year-old from Miyake, the same city where Ikegami's body was discovered. At 4:20 p.m. on February 17, 1982, Wednesday, 5th grader Nishiyama Kumi left school with 2 of her friends. They parted ways roughly 250 meters from the school, and that was the last anyone saw of her. When Nishiyama didn't arrive home, her worried parents alerted the police at 8:40 p.m. that night. A search party was organized the following morning, and her body then discovered in a field halfway between her school and home. This field was less than 2 kilometers from where Ikegami had been discovered 6 months earlier. Unlike Ikegami's case, however, this time the police did have a suspect. Although Ikegami was last seen talking to a man in a reddish-brown car, a man in a white car was seen loitering around Miyake before the attack. Thought to be in his 30s or 40s and described as having a high-bridged nose and sharp, thin eyes, he was seen earlier that day trying to pick up a housewife near the then Kewpie Market Maya bus stop. He asked her, "Want a ride?" but was so persistent when she refused that she threatened to call the police, finally forcing him to leave. At 2 p.m. the same day, that same white car was seen outside Mitagawa Elementary School, roughly 5 kilometers from the Kewpie Market Maya bus stop. He called out to a young girl from his car, telling her, "I have some Pink Lady, a famous pop duo, photos, to show you, so come over here." He then grabbed the girl and carried her into the toilets, but when she screamed, he ran off. At 3:10 p.m., the same man then approached 2 girls walking home from Kitashigeyasu Junior High School, before moving on to 3 elementary second graders 20 minutes later. He told the girls he would drive them home, but they refused. An hour after that, Nishiyama would go missing. At 4:30 p.m., a housewife saw the man's white car parked on the side of the road, close to where Nishiyama's body was found. Considering the time Nishiyama was last seen and the location of her body, it was likely the man was with her at the time. The car had a Fukuoka number plate. Considering the location and the method of both deaths, the police were considering the same person was responsible for both. A likeness of the man was published 3 days later in the February 20th edition of the Saga Shimbun newspaper. This particular case then took a turn for the strange when one of Nishiyama's close friends received a call on February 18th, the day after she went missing, at 7:15 in the morning. When the girl's mother answered the phone, a female voice said, "This is Nishiyama. Is Nani-Nani-chan there?" The mother informed the caller she'd already left for school, and they hung up. Nishiyama's body was found 4 hours later. Nobody ever discovered who made the call, but it was somewhat reminiscent of the mysterious call police received years earlier regarding Hyakutake's disappearance, also made by a woman. The following day, a letter addressed to Miyake City, School, Healthcare Center, stated, "I intended to hold the girl ransom, but she wouldn't stop making a fuss, so I killed her." Another strange phone call and another strange letter, just like in Hyakutake's case. At this point, it was unclear whether these first 4 cases were related. At the very least, Yamazaki and Hyakutake's deaths seemed connected to the same suspect, and Nishiyama and Ikegami's also potentially shared the same suspect, although this connection was less clear. 3 of the victims had been strangled, with only Yamazaki's cause of death unknown, due to how much time had passed since her death. 3 of the victims were from the same area of Shiroishi, with Ikegami's body dumped not far from where the 4th victim was located. 3 of the victims were killed on a Wednesday, with only Hyakutake disappearing on a Friday night. After Hyakutake's death, a letter was sent to her family, and after Nishiyama's, a letter was sent to her school. The original suspect from the first 2 deaths would have been in his early 30s when the next 2 took place, making him the right age for the man, or men, witnesses saw in the reddish-brown and white cars. Were they all the same man, or different men carrying out extremely similar crimes in the same area? After Nishiyama's death, the Wednesday strangulations seemed to suddenly stop. The police had no solid suspects they could pin the crimes on, and the case was at a standstill. Then, 5 years later, on July 8th, 1987, Wednesday, another victim appeared. 48-year-old Fujise Sumiko lived in Kitagata City, just a few short kilometers from Shiroishi. Her husband was too ill to work, so she worked as a waitress in a Japanese inn to support their 2 children. Fujise left her house at 8:30 each morning, walked to work, and then usually returned home between 7 and 9 p.m. Occasionally, she dropped by a nearby snack bar after her inn job to help out. On July 8th, she dropped by this snack bar with one of her colleagues to chat and eat. After they left, they stopped by another small restaurant at 9:35 p.m. Fujise invited her colleague to join her for another round, but she had to catch the train. Fujise told her that she'd also go home then, a 1-kilometer walk from their current location, and they said their goodbyes. This was the last anyone ever saw of her. When Fujise hadn't returned home by midnight, her husband grew worried. The family called her colleagues to see if anyone knew of her whereabouts, but nobody had seen her. Her husband walked up and down the same route she took to work looking for her, but there was no sign. He then went to the police to report her missing. The police set out to look for her, but they also found no trace. With no body, the police couldn't be certain that foul play was at work, but considering that Fujise was the family breadwinner, it was highly unlikely that she would disappear for no reason. Still, with no body and no suspects, the case didn't get very far. It would be another 1.5 years before the next victim went missing. Nakajima Kiyomi, a 50-year-old housewife, lived with her husband and daughters. The eldest daughter had already married and moved out with a child of her own, while the middle and youngest daughters still lived at home. Her husband ran a small post office that their eldest daughter also worked at, so Nakajima often took care of her grandchild while her daughter worked. They were a happy, tight-knit family with a family-run business. Despite her age, Nakajima was an extremely active woman, running her own sewing side business and participating in the local volleyball team as well. On December 7th, 1988, Wednesday, Nakajima's middle daughter returned home for a quick break at 7:10 p.m. Nakajima had already finished dinner and was getting ready to head to a volleyball practice at the Kitagata Sports Center. She left 10 minutes later wearing an ochre sweater, striped cardigan, and navy jumper and pants. She carried 1,000 yen in her bag for her membership fees and walked to the sports center as she always did. It was a roughly 10-minute walk from her house to the sports center, and she usually went with a friend, but on this day, her friend had to miss training, so Nakajima went alone. One area of the route was a thin, overgrown trail that saw little traffic even during the day. Normally, this would be no problem when traveling with a friend, but on this night, Nakajima was alone. Nakajima's middle daughter returned home from work again at 10:50 p.m. At this point, her mother still hadn't returned from training. Initially, she wasn't concerned because she heard they would be discussing what to do for the upcoming end-of-year party. But before long, she realized it was far too late for them to still be discussing such matters. She called the sports center and they revealed Nakajima had never even shown up. When Nakajima's husband got home from work, they both set out to search for her on the path towards the sports center, but there was no sign of her. At 2 a.m. that same night, they filed a missing persons report with the Omachi police. The police and fire department set out at dawn to look for Nakajima, searching the paths leading to the sports center and the surrounding mountains, but found nothing. Sniffer dogs were called in, and they followed her scent from her house to the small trail, where it abruptly ended. This trail was only 5 minutes from Nakajima's house. Investigations revealed one witness had seen Nakajima standing by the trail at 7:30 p.m, talking to another woman in her 30s or 40s on a bike. Police attempted to uncover who the woman was, but they were unsuccessful. As with Fujise's disappearance, the police had little to go on, and the case stalled. On January 25th, 1989, Wednesday, the final victim of the Wednesday Strangler went missing. 37-year-old Yoshino Tatsuyo worked for sewing company Limusu, just like third victim Ikegami. At the time, she was living apart from her husband and back at home with her family in Kitagata. Yoshino clocked out of work at 6:55 p.m. She got home 20 minutes later and sat down to eat dinner with her family. At 7:25 p.m., she received a brief call, only 20 seconds long, and her family heard her ask, "Where are you now?" "Okay," before hanging up. She finished dinner with the family and then helped wash up. At 7:45 p.m., Yoshino got changed into a skirt and white cardigan, put on some makeup, grabbed her bag, and then jumped in her red car. As she was leaving, she informed her mother that a friend had gotten a flat tire, so she was going to drop her off in Yamauchi, roughly 10 kilometers away. Her son, a 4th grader in elementary school, told her he wanted to come along, but she refused. As she pulled out and drove off down the street, that was the last her family ever saw of her, and later investigations revealed she didn't have any friends in Yamauchi. When she didn't return home, her father filed a missing persons report with the police, but it's unclear exactly when he did this. 2 days after Yoshino went missing, a 55-year-old housewife was driving with her husband at 5:50 p.m. when they pulled over by a small roadside altar to pray and leave offerings. The woman picked up a large branch from nearby and started gathering flowers from the roadside. She happened to look over the edge of a nearby cliff when she saw something white at the bottom. It was a cardigan. Realizing it was a body, the woman quickly called the police. The body turned out to be the recently missing Yoshino, but she wasn't alone. 2 meters away, they found a body wearing navy pants and a sweater. She was lying face down and her lower body was badly decomposed. It was Nakajima, who'd gone missing on her way to volleyball practice. Her cause of death was determined to be strangulation. A meter from her, they also discovered another body that had already turned to bones. It was Fujise, who had gone missing 2 years earlier. With only a skeleton to work with, the police were unable to identify her cause of death, but they verified her identity using dental records. Various items of women's clothing hung from trees nearby, and the branch the housewife had picked up when she got out of the car had been sawed off and placed into the ground like a marker, perhaps to remind the perpetrator of where the bodies were located. Other personal effects from the victims were discovered spread out over a 2-kilometer area from their corpses. The remains of all 3 bodies were sent for autopsies on January 28th, the following day, and Yoshino's death was also determined to be from strangulation. Her mouth and nose had been blocked while she was attacked with bare hands. Judging by the state of the digested food in her stomach, this had taken place an hour after eating. Further testing discovered DNA on Yoshino's clothing, but the state of Nakajima and Fujise's remains meant they were unable to recover anything from either of them. Testing determined the DNA came from a man with type O blood, but it had been there for at least a day before she died, suggesting that she was perhaps not assaulted before she was killed. Yoshino's car was found parked at Takeo Bowl Bowling Center, several kilometers away, an hour and a half before her body was discovered. The doors were locked and all windows up. There were no signs of a struggle, suggesting she had parked the car there and then either walked or gotten into another car of her own free will. A schoolchild found Yoshino's handbag on January 26th, the day before, 2 kilometers from where her body was found. The child handed the bag to their grandmother, and it wasn't until later that night that they realized who it belonged to. Her car keys were found in the bag, along with a notebook, incarn stamp, health insurance card, handkerchief, and an empty wallet with only 2 yen. Various other items belonging to Yoshino were found all over town in the following days. The police were unable to lift prints from any of them, but they determined that after the perpetrator dumped her body, he drove counterclockwise down the highway, discarding her personal effects at random along the way. Further investigations then pieced together what was likely Yoshino's final moments. One passerby saw a woman with white clothes standing beside a red car parked at Takeo Bowl at 8 p.m. on January 25th. This was only 15 minutes after Yoshino left her house, and the woman remarked that she appeared to be waiting for someone. Shortly thereafter, a man in a white Toyota Cresta arrived and picked her up. Investigations revealed there were at least 500 white Toyota Crestas registered in Saga Prefecture at the time, and 130 of those were in the Kitagata area. Another woman reversing out of the Takeo Bowl car park around 8 p.m. that same night nearly bumped into a parked red car. The lights and engine were off, and there was no sign of anyone around. At 8:30 the next morning, the manager of Takeo Bowl noticed the red car was still parked in their lot. They didn't report the car, but the following night, the police came around to investigate for themselves. One further witness, however, would come forth with information that would lead the police to a suspect they would chase for decades afterwards. The witness worked for a fish tackle production company, and around 8 p.m. on January 25th, the same time witnesses saw Yoshino getting into a white Toyota Cresta, this man saw a parked whitish truck in the bowling alley car park that caught his eye. It caught his eye because of a particular decoration. Beneath the front window and above the driver's seat, the truck was decorated with a fish scale pattern. He wanted to ask the driver where he bought it, but there was nobody in the truck at the time. The police discovered that Yoshino's new boyfriend, Matsue Teruhiko, 26 at the time, had a truck just like the one the man described. And not only that, he lived only a few hundred meters from where the 3 women's bodies were discovered. The police called Matsue for questioning immediately on January 27th and kept him for 4 days. After being released, Matsue quit his job and moved from his family home to Fukuoka. He was then arrested in October of the same year for drug use, and while being questioned the following month, admitted that he had killed the 3 women. At this point, the 3 Kitagata murders were being treated as a separate incident to the earlier Wednesday Strangler incidents. After all, if Matsue really was the killer, he would have only been 12 when the first victim died in 1975. Not impossible, but highly unlikely. He also didn't fit the description of the man in his 30s or 40s, seen with the 3rd and 4th victims. But Matsue soon retracted his confession anyway, and proclaimed his innocence. It wouldn't be the first, nor the last time, that someone was forced to confess to something they hadn't done during intense police questioning, and this would later be taken into account. Either way, it wasn't until 2002 that police finally decided to charge Matsue with the murders of the 3 women. The statute of limitations was rapidly approaching, meaning that if they didn't move quickly, they would lose their final chance. Matsue, already serving time in Kagoshima prison, was formally charged with Yoshino's murder on June 11th, 2002. He was then charged with Fujise's murder on July 2nd, and Nakajima's murder on July 9th. The statute of limitations for Fujise's murder was to end on July 7th. His trial opened on October 22nd and would last several years, with police asking for the death penalty. But who exactly was Matsue, and why were the police so sure it was him? Matsue was first arrested on July 20th, 1984, for drug use. He served 18 months and then returned to his family home in Kitagata in 1985 on 3 years probation. He helped around the family farm and worked as a driver for a concrete firm in town, But it wasn't long before he was doing drugs again. In September 1986, Matsue got married and lived at home with his wife, mother, and younger sister. He was an abusive man who often cheated on his new bride, so it wasn't a happy home. 1 year later, in October 1987, he was arrested again for drugs, and on December 16th of that same year, sentenced to 14 months prison. Fujise was murdered on July 8th, 1986, 2 months before his arrest. His wife then divorced him in March of the following year while he was in prison. Matsue was released on parole in September 1988, moved back to his family home once more, and picked up his old driving job. He hooked up with an old girlfriend from before his prison time, and although they were serious, he still had other girlfriends on the side. In December of the same year, Matsue learnt that Yoshino, who he knew from around town, was moving back to her family home after splitting from her husband. He got her number and then asked her to go out with him. She accepted. It was around this time that Nakajima, the next victim, was killed. The two soon started dating, and Matsue would call Yoshino's house to arrange where and when to meet. She would drive to the location, get into Matsue's car, and he would drive them elsewhere, usually a hotel or something similar. Yoshino's family knew nothing of this, and she would lie to them about where she was going, usually telling them that she was going to drop a friend off somewhere. Yoshino's younger sister eventually found out about Matsue's existence, but she also kept quiet about it. She knew of his truck with the fish scale decoration and was aware that he had no father and lived at home with his mother and sister. He used that same truck to deliver things for work. At some point, Yoshino told her sister that Matsue had been threatening and violent towards her. Only days before she disappeared, Yoshino had told Matsue that it would be best if they no longer saw each other. He took her for a drive to a nearby cliff and, referencing a recent death that had taken place there, threatened her. According to later testimony from her family, Yoshino began receiving more and more calls to go out, starting from December 1988 and continuing until her death. She would always finish eating, do the dishes, get dressed, and then leave the house, not returning until the early hours of the morning. Throughout January 1989, Yoshino began receiving numerous strange and threatening phone calls from someone proclaiming to be a friend of her husband. Whether this was Matsue, a friend of Matsue's, or someone else entirely, nobody knows for sure. Then, on January 23rd, 24th, and 25th, the night she went missing, Yoshino was called out 3 times in a row, presumably to spend time with Matsue. On January 25th, she got in her car, drove to Takeo Bowl, and according to witnesses, got into a car with a man, presumably Matsue, who had parked his own truck in the same parking lot. Why would he change cars? Was it, perhaps, to hide evidence of the crime he was about to commit? On April 10th, 2005, almost 3 years after the trial had begun, Matsue was found not guilty of all 3 murders due to a lack of hard evidence. The judge also determined the signed confession Matsue made years earlier had been forced by the officer in charge and was thrown out. Prosecutors appealed the decision, but at the first trial on March 19, 2007, the Fukuoka High Court once again ruled Matsue not guilty of the charges. Prosecutors submitted new mitochondrial evidence to the second trial, but it was determined not sufficient to secure a guilty verdict. The police were also criticised for their sloppy work on the case and for keeping the defendant locked up for so many years. On March 29th, the Fukuoka Supreme Public Prosecutor's Office deemed there to be insufficient evidence to continue escalating the appeals and refused the prosecution's request to appeal further. On April 2nd, 2007, Matsue was determined not guilty of the murders for the final time and released. The statute of limitations had passed on all 3 of the Kitagata murders, as well as the original 4 Wednesday strangulations, meaning the police had no choice but to file all cases as unsolved. And while police were unable to pin the murders on Matsue, he was soon behind bars again anyway. In May 2012, Matsue was arrested for a string of 127 thefts across Kyushu and incarcerated once more. So, who did it? Did the same perpetrator commit all 7 murders, or were there multiple killers? How could so many deaths in the same small area over 15 years have so many similarities, and why were there so many details the police still didn't understand? The cases are officially unsolved, but the strangeness of them has garnered much public attention over the years. One of the most predominant theories is that there wasn't a single killer, but rather 2. 2 killers that the police did arrest and charge, but were ultimately unable to get convictions for. You, the man charged for the first 2 crimes but found not guilty, and who possibly killed victims 3 and 4 as well. And Matsue, charged with the final 3 murders but found not guilty due to a lack of evidence. The fact these later deaths also took place on a Wednesday was likely nothing more than a strange coincidence. Numerous questions remain though. Why were these women targeted? Was it simply a crime of opportunity, or were they targeted for a specific reason? Why did the crimes, other than Hyakutake, all take place on a Wednesday? Why was there such a large gap between many of the disappearances? And who was the mysterious woman who called regarding not 1, but 2 of the cases? Was it even the same woman to begin with? And, if not, why were 2 separate women calling about cases with information they shouldn't have, unless they knew about what happened? The statute of limitations has passed on all 7 murders now, meaning that even if someone did come forth and confess, the police would be unable to do anything about it. Whether it really was the men the police charged with the crimes or not, only they know for sure, but the enduring mystery of the Wednesday strangulations inspires debate even to this day. But what do you guys think of this one? Let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you again next time.